Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm sure we'll have others join us as well. First of all, let me again thank you for joining us. Hopefully you've had a chance to participate in the other 3 events. And if you haven't, they are also recorded and available for you to preview and to view again. This will be our final event for Celebration of Manufacturing, our annual celebration. We're glad we can be together, even if we're doing it at a distance. It always is good to catch up with people and spend a little bit of time with people. I actually have a guest today, Harry Moser, who will tell you a lot about reshoring, and we're hoping there'll be a good conversation between all of us. So I'm going to start out by sharing a few ideas to sort of start the juices flowing and getting people thinking about the future of manufacturing. And then I'm going to turn it over to Harry after we take it. I'll take a question or two if you have them, and then we'll turn it over to Harry, and he'll present for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to everybody. So if you give me just a second, and it all works like it did before, I will share my screen. Hey, it worked. Again, welcome everyone. As you know, I really do believe we can see a lot of where we're going from what's already occurred. And so much of the future is beginning to present itself. And I think in some ways, the trends have just accelerated, because what's happened is we've been thrust into using so many new technologies just to do our business to thrive. For those who listened to me or read some of my work, you know, MACNY, for instance, would hold routine physical events, dozens or hundreds of people coming together throughout the course of a year. And we did about 300 events a year in physical format. Starting in March, one day we were there. In fact, we had our last physical event, the cybersecurity event. We had about 100 people. The following Monday, we sent the entire team home and we began serving individuals virtually. Since then, we've served thousands of participants in this format. So we used the technologies that already existed. No new ones were created in that time frame. And we know that's because of this. You know, our rapid acceleration of connectivity, not just to people around the corner, but to people around the globe. I routinely can have conversations and do with people in other countries, and obviously in other parts of this country. And we know that's only going to accelerate. Just the number of things and people connected will do nothing but accelerate. You know, the numbers are actually startling. 4 billion people connected, $4 trillion in revenue opportunity, 25 million different applications, billions of embedded intelligent systems, and an unbelievable amount of data. All of that together creates a form of what's often called the new age of production. Industry 4.0 is not a dream or a thought, it's a reality. Every element of these 9 technologies now exist in most of our companies in some form, and many more to follow. And they are transforming the way products get produced, and of course, the products and services that everybody wants. Just trying to identify at least what I would consider the top 10s of manufacturing. And the ones in particular that I think have jumped out even more so is the need for even a smarter, more tech-savvy workforce, and more diverse, as we've come to know in our community and our society. We need to find ways to continue to reach all elements of society. Cybersecurity, since we're all distributed and even more so into the future, cybersecurity will increasingly be one of the #1 things that companies have to worry about. And of course, we'll talk today about reshoring and the need, not just because it makes financial sense, but because it makes security sense for our country and for your businesses to make it in the US, source in the US whenever it makes sense. But all the other technologies that we see here, really just even manufacturing as a service, many of our members have increasingly moved into the service sector as they service their equipment or service their products. What makes this particularly exciting during this period of time is just the ability for the US to be successful globally. You know, by Deloitte and Touche put this together, I'll try to enlarge it a little bit. And by the way, it is in my slide presentation in my video. You'll see the US really has emerged as the most competitive place to make things in the world. And though it competes hand in hand with many other places you can see as a predominance, this is where leading manufacturers and leading thinkers believe you can best produce products. It's increasingly difficult, actually, to be in production with China. We all know that, given both the strategic challenges and the geopolitical challenges that now have emerged. As I mentioned, it no longer is the factory of the future. Every single one of these elements on this slide is somewhere in many of them in single firms, but they're in all of our firms. I have seen unmanned vehicles, forklifts, move product. Obviously, computer vision, cobots working side by side with individuals. More of this is coming, and it will help you be more productive, but it will obviously bring challenges. And the pace of the change now is exponential. And I think we were used to, change that was linear. And when you start to have exponential change because of the availability of computing power and the ability to do that quickly at a very low cost, small, medium, large companies are all in competition. In fact, small and nimble can win the day. And what it's doing, of course, is causing multiple disruptions across multiple industries, a combining of industries, putting new players into industries, really jumbling and mixing up the entire manufacturing effort. What's emerged even today, though it is sort of counterintuitive, that we have large unemployment in our community, about 12%, that's the recorded unemployment. At the same time, we've got severe labor shortages. And those labor shortages don't show any sense of becoming more limited in the short term. And that has to do with a series of trends that started well before the pandemic, but it's been accentuated because of the pandemic. So we have literally hundreds of known job openings in our members, and there are thousands across the state at the same time we have unemployment. The biggest contributor into the future, I believe, is the changing skill sets. That is, we'll need people with higher levels of what we would call STEM skills, as well as soft skills, the ability to do the very basics that we all require. The other thing is that we're confronting a perceived unattractiveness of manufacturing, which shouldn't be the case. Because manufacturing is actually one of the best industries to be in. It's got the highest tenure. It's got one of the lowest employee turnovers. It's got the highest average wage across all the private sector industries. And really it performs the real work of growing an economy, because that's where 3/4 of the private sector R&D is. So it really is the difference between a thriving economy and one that stagnates. And it's one of the reasons why US manufacturing has taken on a heightened necessity. And I believe it's our moment to continue to focus on making it in the US and doing it well here in the US. What are we hearing from industry leaders? What are they investing into the future? Greater and greater customer connectivity. They're reinventing their supply chains. And this is a reason why we invited Harry, who's a national expert on this. So he's, on the forefront of helping people understand, how do you reevaluate your supply chain? Obviously, you've got to find talent and create a culture that keeps them. Digital assimilation, big data, and enterprise protection all seem to be leading areas for investment. A recent study by RSM would suggest in specific industries, you can see where technologies are being invested in. For aerospace, for example, one of the biggest is additive manufacturing. 3D printing metal parts, something that was unfathomable and certainly wasn't being done as 10 years ago. And now has become, for certain parts, sort of the state of the art. But you're seeing the same thing in automotive. In these key technologies, some of them that I listed earlier, I guess all of them I've listed earlier, would suggest that there's a lot of change going on by industry. Just so you know what we'll be doing, some versions, but increasing efficiency, we hope, and more of them, of the things that we've done in the past. And specifically, we'll be working on workforce initiatives. We think that's a critical component that we can do, along with sharing information, keeping you up to date, of course, advocating for you both nationally and throughout the state through our Manufacturers Alliance, which I'm the president and CEO of. And we're really interested in finding, the best ways to help you learn and to grow. Some of the new initiatives we've talked about in the past, helping individual learners, helping leaders learn, creating much more digital content. We don't expect to go back to all in-person events. We will be going back to in-person events as the situation allows us to do. Increasing your workforce partnerships, our apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeships, which we're now a national leader in that space, and of course, statewide advocacy. Now I'm going to do a quick precursor for Harry, because I want you to know just how critical this is. And I want you to see, and we're seeing this across the spectrum. In fact, New York State is investing in it. And Harry will talk a little bit more about that initiative, that we need to focus on reshoring. And that's because labor costs, total labor cost, unit labor cost is really giving the US an advantage. And because the total cost of ownership actually inspires us to do it in the US. So I'm going to turn it over to Harry. I'll let him go first, and then we'll take questions afterwards. It's probably the most efficient way to do it. So Harry, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to let you share your screen.
Okay, Randy, thank you. Can you, hope you all can hear me okay. It's an honor to be here. A couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, I came up and spoke at one of your live events. And the first job out of college was at, not quite in your area, but at GE, Large Steam Turbine Generator in Schenectady. So I've got a little bit of New York roots. I'm pleased to be here. I'd like to comment first on some of the things that Randy mentioned. He mentioned all these technologies that are coming out, and they're absolutely essential, but they're not sufficient, because the other countries are doing it faster than we are. And any technology that we can get, they can get within a month or 6 months or something like that. And so, for example, Korea has 3 times as many robots per 1,000 manufacturing workers as we do, and China invests 3 times as much in CNC machine tools as we do. So we'd have to be doing 3 times as much investing just to be going as fast as they are. And that's even though their wages are a fraction of ours. And you'd think we'd be doing the one that would be doing the investing. Second, although I agree with everything Randy said, I do disagree with Deloitte's study, the one that shows the US as being #1 in competitiveness. Because if we were, the best measure of competitiveness finally is price. When you look at, we've done surveys of why companies offshore versus producing or sourcing here, and 70% of the reason is price. And when you look at price, the US is on average about 20% higher than Europe and about 40% higher than China. And we have a trade deficit of $800 billion a year. And with our top 10 trading partners, we have a trade deficit, all except the UK, which is a basket case worse than we are, kind of thing. So anytime Deloitte or BCG says we're now #1, well, it's not in the main factor, which is price. And most of you know, finally, that price is what drives many of the decisions that your customers make. Randy mentioned recruiting, and I've been working on the skilled workforce issue for 30 years. And one of the biggest issues has been that the students and the guidance counselors didn't choose manufacturing because they believed all the work was going to go offshore. So why would I want to go into an apprenticeship in tool making if there aren't going to be any toolmaker jobs here when I come out of the apprenticeship? So one of the things that I'd recommend that you do, that your group does, is all of you report your cases of reshoring, even if it's one job, and you get that information out to the media so the media can promote the trend of reshoring in central New York. And then the guidance counselor can say, yeah, Susie, you want to become a welder, become a welder. Once again, that's a good career. Randy mentioned the work that was being done in New York. And so we are working with the New York MEP system, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership. So CEG, Fuse Hub, TDO, and putting out a program that will encourage companies such as yours to participate in a program that helps you reshore either within your company, your own purchases, or convince your customers or prospective customers to reshore. And you'll be hearing more of that from Randy, but also directly from the MEPs. But when they do contact you, I hope you'll they'll take advantage of it. So to understand Randy wanted me to talk about the future, but to understand that, you have to understand the past. And so the U.S. has lost about 5 million manufacturing jobs just due to offshoring. We've lost some additional jobs, but a smaller amount due to automation. But primarily, we've lost the jobs to offshoring. And why did we do that? As I said before, primarily price. And the price, as I said, is higher. Why is it higher? Primarily due to the US dollar. So we have the reserve currency, which makes this a great place to be a bank because everybody else wants to store their money here. This is a safe haven. So everybody feels confident storing the money here. But when they do that, it drives up the value of the dollar, and that makes our costs higher than they would otherwise be. The lack of skilled workforce, like Randy mentioned, until recently, a corporate tax rate that was about the highest in the world, so the ROI was less. A failure by companies to do the math. Randy mentioned TCO, total cost of ownership. That's our tool for doing the math. Most companies don't do that. They look only at the wage rate or the price, the ex-works price, the FOB price. And then China joining the WTO accelerated a trend that had already been underway for years. Fortunately, we've had a good recovery starting in 2010. Since then, about 700,000 manufacturing jobs have been announced to be reshored, and that amounts to about 6% of the total workforce. So if you look at all the manufacturing that's being done, something like 4, 5, 6% of it would not be being done if reshoring and foreign direct investment or related trend had not occurred. Recent things have started to get better. Chinese unit labor costs have gone up about 400% since 2000. That's been a nice, it's made them less competitive. So already before the coronavirus and the trade war, work was coming out of China because it wasn't competitive anymore. So the challenge is for us, not to let that just go somewhere, Vietnam, Korea, India, but to grab a piece of it and bring it into upstate New York. Companies have started to recognize the costs and the risks, the TCO kind of calculation, lean, people like that. Many of you know Deming, the father of quality, and he said, stop buying on the basis of price, instead minimize total costs. So companies are starting to understand that. The lower corporate tax rate helped. Automation, as I mentioned, is critical, but it hasn't been enough. The US productivity growth has averaged only 0.4% per year for the last 12 years, at a time when China has averaged 6 or 7% per year. Now, initially they were at a much lower level than ours, but if you go up 6, 7% a year, pretty soon you get much closer to us. So they're improving their competitiveness faster than we are. So what can companies do about this? I don't know if there's any OEMs out there, any bigger companies, but you can use this TCO, total cost of ownership estimator, which is free online on our website, to buy smarter, to not just look at the price, but to look at all the costs, which would include duty, freight, packaging, carrying cost of inventory, all these various costs. And when you look at those, that closes maybe a 15 to 20% price gap, and all of a sudden a significant percentage of the work makes sense to be bought in upstate New York instead of imported from China or India or somewhere else. Now, for the suppliers, you can use TCO when you're selling to help your customer understand all those costs. We also have something called the Supply Chain Gap program, by which we can identify products that are heavily imported but not being made in the US, and that would be an opportunity for you to fill that gap and become the only US importer, only US producer, and take the work away from the importers. Generally, invest in automation and skills. Things the government should do: skilled workforce. Obviously, at any given time, about 30 or 40% of university graduates are in jobs that do not require a university degree. So we have way too many, and yet we keep promoting more and more people to go to university, and we don't do anywhere near enough to get them to go into apprenticeships and certificate programs, and that we should be shifting resources from one to the other. Keep the corporate tax rates low. and keep immediate expensing. Being able to write off capital investments in the current year, absolutely essential. Get the dollar down. There's various programs to do that. So the Reshoring Initiative, that's my group, nonprofit, offers the total cost of ownership estimator free online, the import substitution program to help the contract manufacturers convince their customers to buy, and programs to help the big companies. So I'm going to show you a couple of slides now, if I can get that to work. Here we go, share screen. Okay. So this slide shows you that trend in reshoring. So reshoring in blue, FDI in sort of orange here. So when we started up in 2010, the sum of the two was about 6,000 jobs. And by 2017, the sum was 190,000. So it's done far in excess of what anybody expected. And then it fell off, unfortunately, in 2018 and 2019, primarily due to the trade wars. So it boomed in 2017, tax cuts, regulatory reductions, et cetera, friendly business climate. And then the trade wars caused business uncertainty and things fell off. Okay, here's that wages and unit labor costs expressed in dollars in China going up. These are various countries. US is in red. Here's China way up here. So they're dramatically less competitive than they used to be. This is the impact of total cost. So I took the first 180 cases of China versus US where people had used our TCO estimator and said they were doing a real project, not just experimenting. And the blue line is a histogram showing that, and the mode, the peak is around 72, and only about 8% of the cases the US had the lowest price, because when it's above 100, that means, since this is the ratio of the Chinese price to the US price, that means the Chinese price is higher than the US price. But when they did the TCO calculation, 8% went up to 32% the US won. And if there happened to be a 15% Trump tariff, then 46% of the time the US won. So this shows you the power of your purchasing department shifting from price to TCO, or getting your customers to shift from one to the other. So as an example of that, this is a Mori Corp. There's an EMS company. They populate circuit boards, good sized company, $100 million a year, contract manufacturer. And they came to me about 5 years ago. They were afraid they were going to lose a huge order. And the VP sales and I did the TCO calculation. He took it in, showed to the customer, and the customer ordered, gave him a $60 million order. And Tony was convinced that using the TCO estimator was key to saving that order. So in terms of companies that have reshored, one of my favorite and a good friend of mine is Cheryl Manufacturing.
And a member of ours.
Yep, Greg Owens and Matt. And they had worked for Oneida. They bought out the Oneida factory. When they started it up, they became the only US stainless steel flatware producer, and they're booming. Especially since the virus, people increasingly want to buy US instead of Chinese, and they're competitive with retail because they sell primarily business to consumer, and they cut out all that middleman. And all of a sudden, they're competitive with the product. They're producing a better product made in USA and selling it at a price that's competitive with the imports that are coming in. So the question was about the future. And in the worst case, I'd say, for the future is we have no industrial policy, manufacturing continues to decline, you don't automate enough, wages stagnate because there's not enough growth, recruitment fails, the income inequality gets worse, the budget deficits just go completely horrible. Eventually, when that happens, the US dollar will collapse, but it'll collapse it'll like happens to Argentina. It'll be one of these things where it comes down like that. And then we'll be the low cost place, and China sends us the dirty work to do, and we have to break our regulations to be able to produce those things cheaply for them. The best case instead is that the rate of reshoring doubles from, say, 150,000 a year to 300,000 a year. The trade deficit disappears. It'll take 20 years because we're going to need 5 million more manufacturing workers, and you're not going to get them in a year or 2 years. The entire image of manufacturing has to change. So it's a 20, 30-year project. Investment booms. And the nice thing about investment, I see a virtuous cycle. When you get busy, as reshoring happens and you get busy, then you can afford to invest, and you have to invest because you have to deliver, and you buy the newest equipment, and your productivity goes up. And as your productivity goes up, then you become more competitive. You reshore more, and this cycle goes around like this. That's essentially what's happened to China over the last 20 years. But we've been operating at about 72, 73% capacity utilization. And we know that you only mainly invest when you're at 80% or higher capacity utilization. So the key to getting the productivity up, the wages up, the competitiveness up is to get us busy again. The best way to do that is reshoring. With these well-paid jobs that come back, a lot of the misery that we see in the inner city will go away, and a lot of the rural communities that lost a factory and they have the opioid crisis. In both cases, the best solution for most people is a good, well-paid manufacturing job, as opposed to handouts or all the other things that everybody's talking about. Get them a good manufacturing job where they can start out at whatever, $15 an hour, and eventually work, if they want to work hard and work their way up and pass the apprenticeship program, eventually make $75,000 or $100,000 a year. That's the right solution. I saw a TV interview a year or so back of a gang leader from New York City, a young kid, but been in horrible problems. And they asked him, what would it have taken to keep you out of the gangs? And he said, $12 an hour. If someone had offered me a job for $12 an hour, I would not have done the gangs. I'd have taken that job. So what an opportunity for you. Kid's probably really aggressive and really determined. Probably could have been a great worker for one of you. So we expect in this bright scenario that productivity will increase maybe 3% a year, and yet manufacturing employment will grow because we've got these 5 million jobs as a buffer that we can draw back into the United States at current levels of productivity. So even at higher levels of productivity, we can both have higher productivity, higher incomes, and more jobs.
Gary, I see a question come in. Cindy, can you ask the question now? No, now it's just get unmuted.
If I unmute, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I know it's going to be difficult to narrow it down, but could you tell us what you think is the one biggest barriers that companies perceive as being the challenge to reshoring? And then to follow that up is that what can we as economic developers and service providers do to enable reshoring?
The biggest barriers that companies perceive to reshoring is cost, is price. You know, they say I can make it or buy it in China for $7, and when I've had it quoted here, when I look at my own factory, it's going to cost $10, and that's 40% more, and that is on average what I showed you in that chart. And if I bring it back and my competitors don't bring it back, I'm out of business, so I can't bring it back. So price is the overwhelming biggest factor, and price is driven by all those things I described: the dollar being too high, not having a skilled workforce like Germany, not enough investment by the companies. All those things drive it. So what can an economic developer do? In the state of Rhode Island, we're working with both the MEP, Polaris, but also the State Commerce Department, which is the economic developer for the state. And between them, they are implementing these programs I just described, we call it Siting and Buying Smarter program, to help the OEMs learn to use total cost, and the import substitution program to help the contract manufacturers convince their customers all over the country to buy from them instead of importing. Also, the supply chain gap program, whereby you identify product categories that you'd like to see made in your region, and we tell you which ones are supply chain gaps, like $100 million being imported and nothing made in the country. And we tell you who the biggest foreign suppliers are, the ones that are shipping that 100 million in, and then you go to them and ask them to be the first in the US to make the product and put the factory right there in central New York. So happy to share that with you. Yeah.
So potentially supporting them in some kind of a incentive to retool, you know, look at what's the possibilities, especially now when there's some companies that are really struggling.
Yep. This, I mean, some cases a U.S. company might say, I can fill that supply chain gap. They're
Right.
making widgets, and you want, and there's a big supply chain gap in widgets. Okay, switch over, start making widgets. That's fine. But the easiest is probably to get the foreign companies to come in, but they're not going to make everything. They're going to need so a supply chain, and so you introduce them to your local companies to become their supply chain once they put their assembly plant into the U.S. So anyway, so it's all on our website, but I'd be delighted to help you. Randy, do we have a way to get them my contact?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. We'll actually be doing it after this event to all of our members, because I know you have specific tools to help companies. Here we have a question from Joelle. Joelle, you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hi, I'm Joelle. I'm actually coming in with a different angle. I work for a company that we help transition high school students with disabilities and help adults with disabilities find jobs. And, you know, we train them with their soft skills and all that as well. So we really want to focus on manufacturing and apprenticeship programs. So right now, since COVID, I've been doing a lot of virtual events, and I would like to connect with companies such as yours to help present to our students and clients to educate them, as well as our people, we call them consultants, our employees out in the field who are dealing with all these students and clients, because I think this is really important. I think we need to educate everybody. So I don't know how we go about doing that.
Sure, I'll jump in first and then I'll let you talk about it here as well. So in our community, please do, Joel, reach out to Martha Ponji or any of our team members, because we actually are very interested in helping a wide variety of individuals, as well as those, and specifically with those that have, you know, maybe hiring challenges, such as those with disabilities. We started to actually work on some apprenticeship approaches in that space, because with so many open jobs, I think there is a real opportunity and need. And you're right, part of it is educating not only employers, but individuals, parents, and the community that these things are available, and that there's a pathway to do it. So yeah, we'd love to work with you. Harry, you may have some insights in this as well.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you.
You bet.
We have huge shortages. You know, people have predicted shortages of 2.5 million workers within a couple of years in manufacturing. And, you know, what a great opportunity. Everybody, those with disabilities, those without disabilities, all of them should be encouraged. And I'd be, anything I can do to help, let me know. But I'm not up there in New York.
Yeah,
well, that's great. Now everything could be virtual, so that's a good thing.
Well, and we love to help you with the virtual outreach. You know, so and we've gotten actually quite good at these tools. Even I can do it, which means anybody can do it. So the reality is, I think that's great. So we love to work with you. If you'll just reach out, you can send me an email, or Martha Ponji. You can find both those on our website, and please.
Great.
Love
yeah, I have some ideas, so we'll be in touch. Thank you. And
fantastic. You know, one of the things, I'm glad you pointed out the companies that are looking to reshore, Harry. I mean, and you're right, Cheryl Manufacturing is a great example, but we've had other companies who've worked on adding new capacity, you know, in the PPE arena, for example. You know, there's plenty of great examples. One of them happens to be in our backyard, Tessie Plastics, which makes a lot of the Abbott testing components, which is now a huge, obviously a huge part of what's going on. But many others throughout the state in New York and other places too are making masks and other immediate needs. So I think the ability to shift is possible. I also will tell you, I've had some conversations more recently with our county executive, Ryan McMahon, who actually is looking for ways to incentivize companies who would like to bring production here, both whether they be U.S. from other states to here or a foreign manufacturer that, as you said, has a supply chain that would then be also strategically located here in Central New York and actually in many other places in the state. So I think now is the time. One of the nice things about it is people are seeing the United States as a place to potentially invest. And I like your tool because if you just look at the price, you may get you may have the wrong reading. You may not be able to factor in all the elements that really go into the total cost of that opportunity. So I love the fact you have tools.
Yeah, let me add something to that, Randy.
Please.
Incentives are great, and incentives make the difference, sometimes make the difference
Good.
of whether the company locates in New York State, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, you know? But incentives cannot be enough to convince a company to move from China, to move their production from China to New York. And the reason for that, the average manufacturing income in the US, probably in New York, is like $80,000 a year. And the average in China is like $20,000 a year. So you got $60,000 a year difference in compensation. And if the factory is going to be there for 10 years, that's $600,000 over that 10-year life of the factory per worker difference. And therefore, and typically incentives are something like $10,000 one time per worker. So you're comparing $10,000 to $600,000 problem.
And actually, the incentives area that you should know are really in the property tax realm. And you're right. They're not enough to on their own convince someone to move. But one of the things I like about it is there's an intent and a desire to see manufacturing grow again. We have to sort of turn the ship, and part of turning the ship is saying we want to invest in manufacturing facilities, not just service facilities. You know, because they don't generate the same multiples. So I think they're all a part of a bigger package. I agree with you, by the way. The corporate tax rate was just one of the key signals we need to send companies, right? Why would we have one of the highest corporate tax rates? Let's make it more consistent with the rest of the country. Dean, I know you had a little bit of experience on some of this. Maybe you can chime in and share some experience.
Yeah, Harry, you and I have talked before. I've used this tool a couple different times, and very honestly, it's difficult to convince anybody that the cost to reshore or the opportunity to reshore is worth the effort. Traditionally, the people who are looking to reshore are looking for opportunities, are looking only on price, and they tend to be people, especially in larger corporations, they tend to be lower in the food chain is probably not the right word, but they're lower purchasing buyers, and they're only incentivized on how much money they save. They really don't care much about the landed cost or the total cost or the quality. All they're being incentivized and rewarded on is how much money they can save. So I think it's a great tool, but I've yet to be able to convince anybody in the couple times that we've used it that the equal or 5% more to buy it from us, especially in large corporations which are very price conscious, that it's worth all the effort to change a supplier, especially components that many of us on this call are critical and require revalidation of processes and end products. So that's been my experience.
It's certainly not going to work all the time,
Yep.
but there's been enough studies done. For example, Professor John Gray at The Ohio State University picked 4 companies, Midwestern companies, that had offshored and then reshored. And he has a very clear paper that says, why did they offshore? Because the price was lower. Why did they reshore? Because after a couple of years, they understood all these costs and risks that they'd ignored when it happened. And then it was clear they should bring the work back. And they're glad that they did. And there's been 5 or 6 studies around the country, around the world, actually, of the magnitude of what we call the hidden costs, the difference between the FOB price and the total cost, or duty, freight, packaging, all this stuff. And it turns out to be consistently 15 to 25%. So really big numbers. It's not like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5%. We also have we have a database, we call it the Reshoring Library, that has about 3,000 cases of reshoring in it, in manufacturing. And so one one way to convince the companies is to go in there and find a competitor that has successfully reshored. So if you can show them, if you can show GM that Ford reshored that product and apparently is happy with it, well, you would hope that they'd be a little more willing to look at it. And another thing that I would suggest, the Business Roundtable. So Business Roundtable has the top CEOs in the country on it. And in August of 2019, they changed their statement of the purpose of a corporation, the responsibilities of a company. Until that time, the responsibility had been to the shareholder. And now they call it the stakeholder. That includes the shareholder, but also the employee, the supplier, and the community. The 180 of these top CEOs, really the big time people, have said our commitment is now to all to those three groups in addition to just the shareholder. So if I were making the conversation and I had one of those companies, I'd go to the purchasing. If they wouldn't listen, then I'd go around them to quality, to inventory control, to sales, to marketing, to warranty, all the people that are suffering from the bad quality and the bad delivery, see if they'll help. And if they won't help, I'd go up to the CEO that signed the statement and said, you signed this thing. I can't get your people to behave consistent with what you signed. Can I get your help? So if you can't win at the low level, go around them and fight.
The other thing I think, Harry, that's changed is the risk level has been increased. You mentioned, the more recent conflicts specifically with China, but other countries as well, and that's not going away. The reality is, it doesn't matter who wins the presidential election. Both have talked about, the need to have U.S. jobs and growth in our country. So I do think that risk factor has increased because there was a general trend that it would just continue to be as it was. So I think that also throws a unknown into some of the questions. I want to go to Don Lynch. Don, you had a comment and a question.
Yes, good morning, everybody. And Harry, thanks for the comments. It's in the slides, very interesting information. I have a question that perhaps is a bit more academic than specific to a company or an industry. But what I noticed, or what I thought as I was listening to you and looking at the slides, is that there's different product categories. If you aggregate everything, stick it all together, you can come up with some general conclusions. And I really find that information helpful. But if we segregate this into what a lot of us supply chain practitioners have to make decisions on, there's a high material content and high labor content kind of distribution. And high labor content are products that are still part of our economy. Some of them may still be high tech, but there's still a high labor content element to them. And so from your perspectives, what are your thoughts on the future of high labor content product categories and how that fits into some of the global trends that you shared?
Well, high labor content, you could break it down further. There's certainly those that can be automated and make them not high labor content anymore. And there are those that are customized or customizable, and where people will pay a premium for the customized product, some clothing, haute couture, all this kind of stuff that people make in the country, and people will pay for it. And finally, it's clear that unless the country does the things it should, like get the dollar down and so on, or have a value-added tax like all the other countries have, unless we do those things, then the really labor-intensive things are not going to come back until you automate them, et cetera. And in that case, my first priority is clearly the U.S., but I'm a North American, and if the work comes back to Mexico, where the labor costs are equal to China's, okay, the product coming out of Mexico on average has 40% U.S. value added, whereas product coming out of China has 5% U.S. value added. So if you can't get it here, then get it back into Mexico and provide the tooling and some of the chemicals and the resins and things down to them, and we're much better off and more secure than being dependent on China, for example. So,
and it has been a trend right here that the movement to Mexico in some key industries, in part because of the challenges with being in China. So I do think
what
that's,
we've recommended is to strengthen USMCA and actually have the US, Canada, and China get together and act as a team to pull the work out of Asia back into the North America, but with labor intensive more in China, more in Mexico, and the skill and technical up here. And so I've got a program to do that and bring 1 million jobs into Mexico and 1 million to the US and a couple 100,000 to Canada. And I'm convinced it would work. And I was down in Monterrey, Mexico about 4 years ago speaking, and they were all saying, we're going to sell more to the US, more to the US. They're sloppy and lazy up there. And I said, well, you can do that, but somebody's eventually going to, up here is going to say no more, no more. And instead, note that you have a $80 billion trade deficit with China and an 80 billion trade surplus with the US. Instead of increasing your surplus with the US, why don't you reduce your deficit with China and make the things you're importing from China? And then you're not going to get the US so mad that they're going to get tough with you and slap you around and not take the stuff that you're shipping out.
Well,
and they listened a little bit at least.
And it also, by the way, solves other geopolitical problems. When you stabilize parts of South America and Central America through greater employment, as you mentioned, both in the US and in those areas, you strengthen other needs that exist in our hemisphere. So I think these are opportunities that, you're right, Harry, that present themselves. And this is the moment to seize them. I do think it's a battle. Let's be honest, it's not going to stop being a battle. But I think there are some potential pivots here. I've been in some good conversations with some of our national political leaders. I think there's a possibility that we'll see more focus on U.S. buying and or strengthening, like you said, the North America opportunities. When you find both candidates, in fact, championing the opportunities that can be realized with new and improved relationships with both Canada and Mexico. I think that would help us all. Are there other examples, questions, or comments from the group? Because it's always good to hear from all of you. I'll unmute you. One of the things here that I want you to talk a little bit about, as we're waiting for another question, is the impact of automation to actually job growth. Sometimes there's a misnomer about the fact that when you're automating, you're necessarily going to see job shrinkage.
Well, I think I mentioned that productivity has only grown at 0.4% per year for the last 12 years. And prior to that, we were growing at 2% or 3% per year in terms of manufacturing productivity. So at 0.4% a year, you can't lose many jobs to productivity. But the articles keep coming out talking about robots are going to take all your jobs. And so my belief is that, and I'm quite sure of this, that the US will lose more jobs to Chinese productivity increases, to Chinese automation, if we do not automate, than we will to US automation if we do automate. So if we don't automate, we become less price competitive, we don't improve quality, we don't find the workforce that we need, we buy more from China. If we do automate, it's the opposite of that, and we win more of those battles. So clearly we'll be a stronger country and have more jobs if we do a really good job of automating. But to do that, I know, and I've run companies, and when you're making money, when you're busy and making money, you invest, and when you're losing a lot of money, you don't invest. So my job is to get you busy enough so you can afford and you're motivated to do that.
Great. Harry, could you take down the screen? We'll get a chance to see everybody. We're getting close to the end here. Cindy, you had an example of a great reshoring. I think it's a member story, actually.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of our local companies, Hollowick, they make little blow molded candle type things for restaurant business, or they're struggling a little bit right now. But the story I wanted to tell is that back a few years ago, they were getting their bottles from China because they couldn't find a source in the US that the cost was low enough, and they were able to get in quantities that they needed, because they have some that are small quantity and some that are larger, et cetera. So finally, because of the quality issues they were getting out of China, you know, the boatload would show up and 30% of it was no good. Now they'd get it replaced, but in the meantime, they were short of inventory. So they are not a blow molder. They weren't. They went out and bought 2 blow molding machines and set them up and learned how to do it in their factory. And they blow mold overnight based on their exact need for the next day. So that's, I think, a great story of reshoring.
If you've got if anything's been written on it, send it to me and I'll put it in our database.
It'd be awesome. It's a great example. And it really is part of bringing work back into their facilities. We have numerous of those examples I've heard from our members as well. So we're gonna end a few minutes early so you can get to your event if you have one, or next thing at 11. I really want to thank Harry for joining me, and of course all of you for spending time with us today, talking about the future of manufacturing. I've never been more optimistic about where we can go. I think we are in a moment where we can reclaim manufacturing, specifically in the high-tech areas, and add value. I'm really glad that Harry's working with New York State and the MEP network, our good friends at the TDO, as well as the other MEPs across the state that we work with. So we're pretty excited about doing that as well. So we'll put out more information so you can join those events. By the way, I always enjoy seeing all of you. Thanks for popping on the screen and spending a few moments with us. And of course, have yourself a great day. We appreciate you being with us specifically for celebrating manufacturing. There's a lot to celebrate. Challenges ahead, but there's a lot to celebrate. So thanks everyone, and have yourself a great day. Thanks again, Harry. Thanks, Stephanie, for helping organize this as well. Thanks everyone.